Here we go. Here's a this week's screencast. Here's this week's screencast recording, and we're going to be talking about doing secondaries and how we do a secondary correction in Apple Color. I'm going to try to race through this as fast as we can, showing us not only the different kinds of secondaries we can do, but combining them, and then we'll end this screencast and move on to grade management. So how do we stay organized with all of the grading and corrections that we do in this program? So that'll be for the next screencast. But starting out, let's just look at these couple of clips we have in our timeline. This is from the lesson 4, and you can find lesson 4. We did this in class. These are the clips that we worked on in class, and I just want to run through what we did in class, so you have that available to you. And what we talked about in class first and foremost was what is the most important thing in terms of the process. Not so much how we, following the steps in the program itself, but what are we trying to accomplish, and what is the process in which we accomplish making the shots look the way we want. And we learned the first thing we do is the primary end. We do a primary correction. That means we correct the whole image all in one go. We don't target specific areas. We just, how do we want to fix the image? And the first thing we learned was contrast. We want to adjust that. So we can look at our scope here and see how are we on contrast. So we've got our Luma waveform scope, and we see that we have here, there's this black bar right at the bottom, and of course that means that we've got a letterbox in here. But we can see the image itself has some black approaching 0. That's where we want to be. And then we have the highlight areas just peaking above 80%. And if we look at our shot, that actually is pretty accurate. The brightest portion of this frame is probably the highlight on this door or the white door frame edge. Anything brighter than that, we can crank that up using the highlight. We can crank that up, and that white approaches 100%, which is totally pure white, and that's not necessarily the case in this shot. I don't think it would be that bright. I think where we had it was probably correct. So I'm going to reset the Luma, and I could do a primary correction here if I wanted to. Just for the sake of doing something, I'll just go ahead and crank this up just a tad bit. I want it just a little bit wider in the mid-tones. Let's say I want to warm it up a little bit, and I like that. And maybe I want to increase my saturation level just a little bit to 1.1. And I'll call that my primary correction, okay? We'll notice down here in the track we've got a grade select. That means we're working on a grade here, and it's going to record everything that we do to this particular image. And you'll see that we have a primary 1 down here where you made some corrections, and so it's logging it down here in our little grade track here. We'll see how this evolves. Next thing I want to do is let's move on to the secondary, what this whole thing is about. So here I am in my secondary tab. And you'll notice I have 8 different secondaries I can do. Okay, this means that I can layer 8 different secondary corrections on top of one another in this particular shot. So I will start in secondary number 1. Whatever correction I do here in this secondary, if I want to start combining things, I'll go to tab number 2, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's go ahead and do a primary correction. And the first thing I want to do is I want to isolate this guy's face. I want to make his face look I want to make a correction just to his face, because his face and this brick wall here is very similar in color and tone and saturation and luminosity. I need to do some isolating with the program in order to just affect his face. So here we're going to do is an Hsl Qualifier. I'm going to pick this little dropper tool here, and that's going to automatically enable this secondary, and it gives me the crosshair here in Apple Color. So I'm going to click his forehead right here, and I'm going to drag down, click and drag, holding the mouse button down until I get to right about here, and I'll let go, and it has pulled a matte for me. But let me slide down here a little bit in the timeline. This is where I see the full gamut of his face. If I don't like this initial pick that I did, I'll just go ahead and pick it again. I'll click this dropper tool, come back over here, and I'm going to select probably right here and drag down on his face, and maybe go all the way to here. And okay, so I pulled him out on his face now. So I've definitely got the door out, but I've got his face highlighted here, and I can adjust this up here, the hue and saturation. I can slide over. I can adjust the saturation level here. So what I'm going to try to do is isolate his face a bit more. So I increase the saturation a bit. Luminosity, I can move this around a bit until I start getting just what I want in terms of his face. I like that. Let's just say, okay. And remember, shift clicking on any one of these moves just one of these one side at a time. If I don't hold the shift and I click, I move both sides at the same time. And I'm going to probably limit this color a little bit until I get it to where I want. Okay, so I'm going to play with this matte until I like what I see. And then I'm going to blur it a little bit. Let's say 0.75. That softens the edge a little bit and makes it a little bit more pleasant. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to add a vignette to this. Now, the vignette works by itself, and I can just create a vignette and of course adjust the shadow, midtone, and highlight correction inside or outside that vignette, depending on what I choose. Or I can combine it within just this secondary here with this matte selection I did with my Hsl Qualifier. Okay, so that's what I did. I've selected a matte. I want to be able to get rid of this wall now. I've got just his face selected, but I don't want to affect the wall, so I'm going to go ahead and create a vignette. I'm going to change it to a square, and then I'm just going to slide this square over till it is totally off of the wood, the brown there, and I'll go ahead and stretch it up to the top and bottom. And the reason this works is if I go ahead and select this shot, the camera is still, and the edge of that vignette is right at the edge of that door frame, which is what I want. Okay. Now let's do my little primary correction. So what I'm going to do is go down here to my vector scope, and I'm going to select the midtone right here, and I'm going to move this. And as I move this around, I want you to watch that vector scope at the bottom. What I'm moving around there that's just his face right there is what I'm manipulating. And in order to get it to the skin tone I want, I'm going to put it right on that line, or maybe just a little bit more, lean it a little bit towards red a little bit, and that's actual skin tone. And I can bring it back towards the middle until it just peeks out from behind the bit of traces that is already there. So there's some traces right there, and I'm going to slide this saturation out until it just peeks out from behind it. I hope you guys can kind of see that. What I'm doing here is down here I have a trace that isn't being manipulated in this particular selection I have, but right behind it, as I move his face out along this line, you can see it peek out from behind this cloud, and that's what I'm going to do, is move it out from behind that, right along that line, and maybe push it towards red just a little bit. Okay, and let's remember over here and where I have my preview pane, I've got these three little buttons on the side here. This is the full representation. This is just the matte, so I can see just what's being manipulated in the frame. And you'll notice that there it is. The wall's been cut out because for my vignette, I have my control set to inside. That means I want to control what's inside this vignette. If I select it to outside, you'll notice that it's just the brick wall that gets affected and not his face. Well, There, I set it to outside, but there it's still doing the inside of his face. I guess it only works. Well, I guess it only works when I'm combining it with an HSL. It only works with the inside. I can set it to outside, and it's gonna keep it on the inside. Well, you learn something new every day. Okay, so there it is. What I wanted to do, let's remember, in my secondary was isolate his face. And so I had to figure out what tools can I use in the secondaries to just isolate his face. You could do it several different ways, but the idea is how do I get there with the most efficiently and easily. And the fact is that his face moves, but the door doesn't. And I could just vignette just the area on his face and track that if I wanted to, but that's really not the most efficient way of doing things. Really the best way to go about doing it, let me increase the saturation a little bit. I just continued, once I had this isolated, I continued to adjust my HSL until I got all of his face right there on his cheek. I was missing some stuff, but so I'm losing track of things here. What I did, I decided I was going to do an Hsl qualifier for just the skin tones on his face, and then I was going to use the vignette to basically isolate just this area where his face appears. Even though the door opens and it moves, his face always stays within that frame, and I was able to keep the actual brick wall out. So I can click this again and combined, and I'll see that I've isolated his face. I've got his skin tones where I want it to be. Maybe I want to make it a little bit pinker. That's fine if I want to do that, and I'm not affecting the brick at all. So that's a secondary correction. I've targeted just a portion of this shot, just his face. Let's say what I want to do now is I also want to change the color of this door. Well, all right, let's move on. That's my next goal. How can I target just that door? Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll go to the second tab, because this is going to be a second primary, and another secondary, number 2. And let's pull another Hsl qualifier on this door. This door moves. I don't, remember, any correction I do in this particular vignette is going to affect everything in the shot again. So I got to figure out what's the best way to isolate just this door. Well, it looks like color is going to be the best way to do it. If I just select the color range here, that'll be my best bet. So I'm going to select the dropper tool again for select the qualifier, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click probably right about there and drag down, or drag this way until I get something that looks like what I'm looking for. That's done a pretty good job of selecting what I want. I can expand my hue a little bit to maybe slide it towards the green yellow a little bit. Maybe what I want to do is try moving the saturation and see how that works. That looks pretty good where it is. Might want to open it up a little bit. Usually what I'll do is I'll just open it up until I stop seeing any kind of effect. And I'll slide this around. I think what I want to do is I'm going to shift click on the lower end here and drag open at the bottom of this, because I want to get that sort of this top corner of the door here. So I'm going to drag, because it's darker up there, so I'm going to drag this part of until it just pops into view. And maybe what I want to do is reduce the highlight a little bit. Maybe increase the saturation here. Okay, so that's how I go about just manipulating this mat until I see exactly what I want to see. Let's preview. I'm going to preview just what I've selected. And it looks pretty good. Looks like I got just the green door here. So I've done another secondary. I've isolated just the door in this shot, and now I can change the color if I want. So I can maybe change I can grab the midtones and change the color. Oops, I've got to go to the, I can't see the change until I select the preview. And let's make it some blue. As I drag it towards the blue, I can increase the saturation a little bit. Okay, so I can do that. If I want to do some more saturation just in general, I can go over here into saturation and type, enter a number. So now I have a nice bright blue door here, and it hasn't affected his face. You'll see that I've kind of got a little bit of this door frame here. Well, what if I don't want to do that? What if I want to just affect the door? And I'm also catching a little bit of the blue in his eye, the white of his eye here. And that's probably not something I want to do either. I can try refining this this matte here and go down to my matte. You can see I've got this eyeball here. So I can try adjusting the luminosity until I get rid of his eyeball. And I can increase the saturation. You notice that once I get the saturation past a certain point here, his eyeball comes out of there. But I'm also losing more of the door. But that's looking a little bit better. Let's go back to my preview. There's my door. I got that door frame out. It's not affecting his eyes so much. We can probably do a vignette and track the door a little bit, but we'll learn tracking here in another episode of this. Actually, next week we'll learn some tracking techniques. But that looks pretty good, and that's my secondary number 2. Let's go to the next shot in this series. We'll call that a day, and on that, that's given me the correction I'm looking for. I can continue to march down in these tabs and isolate more corrections. I can make this brick really red. I can change the color of this wood stripe here if I wanted to. There's a lot I could do in this image and with secondaries. But let's look at something if I wanted to create a custom matte here. We've seen vignettes that are circles and squares, but what about if I wanted to isolate just his jacket per se? Well, let's say I wanted to make his jacket look different. Well, how would I do it? Before we talk about custom shapes, why would I want to choose a custom shape? Well, why can't I just pull an Hsl Qualifier and just his jacket and isolate his jacket? Well, let's see what happens when we try to do that. So I select my dropper tool, I go over here on his jacket, and I drag down to select just his jacket. And you'll notice that I've got his jacket pretty well, but look, I got some of his face, I got the sky, I got the ground, I got this guy's jacket. I mean, because so much in this shot is in the same color range, this method isn't going to work. I'm going to have to do something different. I'm going to approach it in a different way. So let me reset this. I go down here to reset secondary, not all secondaries, but just secondary. All right. And what I need to do is create a matte that just surrounds his jacket. If I preview the shot, I'll notice that he stays pretty still in the shot, so I can create a matte that's maybe just a little bit bigger. He moves his arm a little bit, so probably what I want to do is find the frame where his elbow sticks out the most, because that's about as big as this matte needs to be, this little vignette that I need to create. So I'll stop here on that frame, and I'll use this to draw my vignette. So I'll go down here to shape. I can turn this on if I like, and then I can go down to circle, and I'll select user shape, and it automatically jumps me to the geometry tab. And this is where I can begin to start cutting out the vignette, or drawing the vignette. So I don't need to do anything else. It's ready to go. It's already created a name for a shape. It's saying I'm creating a new shape here. I just need to start clicking in the shot. So I'm going to start down here, and I'll click a spot. I'll start here, and I'll click a spot. I'll click here. Now you'll notice on the third click, I now have a curve, and this white line is the curve. I can go here, and oops, I'm going to have to just sort of keep on drawing until I've closed the shape, and then I can adjust this a little bit. But so anytime I want to make a sharp turn, I want to keep these points close together. Here's a sharp turn. I'll keep these points close together. But as I start getting out here where I have a nice smooth curve, I just want to create 3 points that draw that curve. Down here I've got 3 points that draw this curve. And I just want to use the fewest number of points as possible. The tighter I make these points, the more jagged this curve can become. Just between 3 points, I got a nice smooth curve. So if I want to look at what I have so far and adjust things, I can close my shape. This goes from orange to yellow, and now I can start grabbing these points and adjusting my curve. But so far it looks pretty good. I like what I see here. Maybe drag this up a little bit, this out a little bit, and this out a little bit. All right, good enough. I want to go ahead and make sure that I don't have any of this black shirt selected. So I'm going to open my shape back up using this open shape, and I'm going to just keep on drawing from here to here, close together. I'm going to draw 3 points to make it a sharp turn. 1, 2, 3, sharp turn, and then here, 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 and I don't need to click this last point, but all I need to do is close my shape, and it's going to connect those points for me. So once I do that, maybe what I want to do is open my shape again, click a point here, and I'm going to, oops, I closed my shape. That's fine, but I'm going to go up here and drag this up so I can get this curve a little bit better. Drag it off his shoulder. So I'm just going to go in here and manipulate things until I have the mat I like. Looks good to me. I'm happy with that. And so once you're done with the shape that you've created, you can now feather this shape. That means I'm going to create a soft edge around this. And this would be just a hard edge on the shape, but if I want to increase the softness, I go to the softness here and I increase this value. You can click and middle mouse drag. You can scroll your mouse wheel over this, or you can type in just a number. So here I go. Now I've got a softened edge, and these green areas I can control how much of a soft edge I have. You'll notice there's 2 white curves here. This is the inner curve, and this is the outer curve. So I go from solid vignette here, meaning everything, this would be solid white if we imagine this is a mat. Remember when we pulled a qualifier on the guy's face? What white means that I'm going to manipulate anything that's white inside here, and then black won't be manipulated at all. Well, this is just another representation of that. So this will be solid white here, and then we go from solid white to solid black by the time we reach this other edge here, this other white curve. I can turn the hide shape handles, and you can kind of see this more clearly. So I want everything inside this inner curve to be manipulated, and so I want to adjust this until I get his jacket on the inside of this inner curve, and then it's all going to feather out to black and won't be manipulated, and I want to get any of that off of his skin. So everywhere else this looks pretty good. I might want to get this off of his shoulder a little bit too. So I'm going to show my handles, and I'm going to work this a bit until I get this off of his face and off of his neck. And there's that. So I just kind of keep working this until I pull this off of his skin. Okay, looks good. I'm going to pull this off of his shoulder. I'm going to tighten it up here. Okay, so right here at the shoulder, it gets pretty tight. And I'm going to move this all around here. I move the yellow one if I just want to move both edges at the same time. If I want to move just the inner edge, I'll grab this side. If the outer edge, I'll grab this side. And so anyway, I like this mat. This looks pretty good. This is going to serve us for the most part right now. And okay, once I'm done manipulating this, what I'll do is I'll go over to my attach button here, and I'll click attach. So that means I'm done manipulating the shape, and I'm going to attach it. Okay, it's now been attached. It creates that shape, and I can flip back over to my secondaries tab, and there it is. There's my vignette back into my secondary, and we're in the number 2 tab, and now I can go and start adjusting things. So I'm going to grab my midtones and just drag it out here somewhere until I get the color I want. I want his jacket to be a little bit beige and yellow. Looks good. Looks like I've done a good job of keeping it off of things. You'll notice that there's a little bit of the jacket right here that isn't getting manipulated. This isn't getting manipulated so much either. So I could go back and adjust my vignette until I got until I'm targeting just this guy's jacket. I've been doing that in a secondary in the number 2 tab, and really I should have been doing it in the number 1, but because this all works in sequential order. Whatever I do in number 3 is going to affect it's going to affect the image as it's been corrected so far. Let's do another vignette. I'm going to go ahead and just create what looks like a typical vignette, meaning I'm going to drag this out here, and I'm going to make the corners look a little bit darker, as if it looks like a real lens, and we got a little bit of vignetting in the lens. So I'm going to drag a little circle and make this a little bit bigger. So I got a nice faded area here, and I want to make sure that I select outside, because I want to affect the outside of this. I want just the corners to get darker. So then I go into my shadow area and I drag down. Oops. And you'll notice that the corners are getting darker. I'm creating that little vignette type thing. I can make it smaller, and I can bring the vignette in, and I can adjust this, and you'll notice that it's affecting everything. Like in Photoshop, when we layer things, everything underneath is affected. So every secondary I've done so far is going to be affected by this one. Now let's go to number 4, and let's isolate just the sky here. I want to manipulate the sky. So let's say I want to, because the sky is a very kind of orange yellow color, what I'm going to do is create some spots here, some points here in that hue, because I want to manipulate just these colors. So maybe I want to drag down a little bit, drag up a little bit, and that's too much, because I want to affect these colors. I want to make them a little bit more saturated. So I can go and play with these things a little bit. I can go to my saturation and increase that. Maybe I want to get some of the magenta that I had in there out. Okay, so I really bump up the saturation here. And there I've isolated just the sky to sort of bump up that saturation and make the color a bit richer and more orange. These curves here really are just, you operate these by themselves. You can't combine these with vignettes or Hsl qualifiers. These curves are really just allow you to target just, they really work all by themselves. I can't combine these with anything in this particular secondary. So this is, the short and easy review of how secondaries work. What I need to do is, first do my primary and manipulate the image the way I want, start with contrast, and then I do a little color correction just as the whole image. And then I go into my secondaries and I target specific areas. I decide what is it that I want to do. I want to, and how do I isolate it in the secondary in the most easiest and most efficient way. If the shot is moving, if the shot is still, if the object that I want to correct is moving in the shot, there's lots of different things to consider as far as how best to isolate it in the shot. So hopefully that gives you some strategies of how to use a Hsl qualifier or a keyed correction, how I would use a vignetted correction, and then how I'd use curve corrections to basically create several different secondaries and combine them in one shot. All right, that's all for now. We'll go look at basically how do we manage grades and corrections in a program so that we can better organize ourselves for an entire sequence of shots.